My teeth chattered. "Well," I said, dropping to my knees to hug an arm around Bo's shaking neck. That's it, buddy. We're gone." Bo nuzzled in against me. It scared me how much he was shaking. He stretched up to lick my chin. I scratched him behind the ears. I didn't know if tears could freeze, if they could turn into ice in your eyes and blind you, but they felt too hot to freeze. I turned back to where I was going, still on my knees. The slope climbed away above me, steeper all the time. With the wind and the snow, I could only see maybe 100 feet. "I wish I could see you," I hollered up to the mountain, hoping the wind would carry my words to the hiding peak. There was no answer, and no break in the clouds. I got to my feet. I kept going. All my sense of time and direction was scattered by the wind. There was only up and down, and I was going up. And I kept my eyes down on the shadows of the footsteps I was following, of all the climbers and guides before me. The snow was so white, even in the dark of the storm, that I had to squint. I walked, sometimes with my eyes closed. I felt a little warmer that way. I couldn't see the sun, but I knew that it was moving. Something in the shadows, or the angle of the dim light, told me that noon had come and gone, and afternoon and evening was coming behind the clouds. And after that, night, darkness. Ignoring my lungs, my legs, my head, and walked faster. I kept going. For minutes or hours, it's hard to say, I walked. For feet or miles, impossible to measure, I walked. I was too cold to be hungry. Although I didn't look back again, I did stop sometimes and squint forward. I wanted to see it. I wanted to see the mountain. I wanted to know it was there. I was always lost somewhere in the clouds ahead, gone. It was when I stopped again on my hands and knees with Bo shivering beneath me that I saw the climbers. I was peering up to the sky, the peak, when the blowing snow parted for a moment, and I saw a line of people. They were small, far away. They were trudging downhill, back down away from the mountains and toward where people lived. But they weren't coming toward me. They were off to the side, up on a ridge of snow a little higher than me. There was a deep little valley of snow between us. I crouched there with my knees and gloves in the snow. I shook my head and tried to think, sucking the weak air in through my chapped lips. "They're off the path," I said to Bo. My voice was thin and panting. "They're lost." I wondered if I should try to get them, try to warn them that they were going the wrong way. It's a big mountain. If you wander too far in the wrong direction, you can disappear altogether. But no, I couldn't let them see me. A kid out here, alone in the storm on a mountain, they'd thank me for saving them, and then drag me back down. I bet they had a guide. Anyway, to get them home safe. Home. Safe. I shook my head and staggered to my feet and kept going. It was a little while later, or maybe hours, I don't know, that I realized that I wasn't following any kind of trail at all anymore. I stopped short. The snow in front of me was smooth and windblown. I jerked around and looked back behind me. No footprints, not even my own. I stood and wrestled with the air for breath. I'd been walking in a haze. My thoughts wouldn't string themselves together. Shivers racked my whole body. I had no idea how long I'd been walking without watching where I was going. I remembered the other climbers, the ones heading back down. They weren't off the path. I was. What direction had they been in? I looked all around and saw only white. I couldn't see the ridge they'd been on, or the valley between. I couldn't even remember exactly the way I'd been looking when I'd seen them. I was all in circles. I kept turning and squinting and shaking my head. At my feet, Bo shook himself and whined. No matter where I looked, there was nothing but white. But it was a darker kind of white than it had been before. Night was coming, and I was lost. Chapter 11 and a half. Waiting gets heavy. Wondering is like drowning. Questions haunt and hide. Jessie waited at the table while Mark's mom finished making dinner. She always ate dinner with Mark and his family on weeknights, when her mom worked late, only now there was no Mark. "I'm there, Jess." The words ached in her heart. They were like an open scab. She tried not to, but she picked at them. "I was just feeling kind of lonely." The whole house hung like broken dishes before they hit the floor. The TV was on in the kitchen. It was the news again. She could hear the anchorman's calm, careful voice. There were only two big stories, Mark and the storm. To the people on the news, it was two different stories. Not to Jessie. She wondered why his mom had it on. Just for the noise? Just to know the rest of the world hadn't forgotten about her lost boy? Mark's dad was sitting across from Jess at the table. He had the newspaper out in front of him, but she could tell he wasn't reading it. He was just staring. His face looked lost. Mark's mom brought out 2 plates piled high with spaghetti and meatballs. It smelled warm and familiar. Jessie wondered if she'd made it because it was Mark's favorite, like he was just hiding in the backyard and he'd smell it and come right out of the dark. Or maybe just because it was the only thing she could try and do for him, make his favorite dinner. It's what moms do. Mark's dad didn't even look up from the paper he wasn't reading. "You need to eat something," Mark's mom said quietly, squeezing his dad's shoulder with one hand. "I'm not hungry," he answered, shaking his head. "I told you that." "I know, honey, but you need to eat." He shook his head again and blew out his breath. "I just can't, not yet." She cocked her hip and lowered her chin. "I'm not leaving until you eat a meatball." His dad glared up at her, but he stabbed a meatball with his fork and popped it in his mouth. His eyebrows kept glaring, but the corners of his mouth smiled as he chewed. Mark's mom patted him on the shoulder and walked back into the kitchen. His dad saw Jessie watching across the table, and he rolled his eyes and winked at her. She smiled back, and they both took a mouthful of spaghetti. She chewed and thought, and it all came together with the taste of her lost friend's favorite dinner in her mouth. She saw the 4 of them all connected, her and Mark and his parents. And Bo, too, out there somewhere by his boy's side. And her own mom, even getting home from work about now to a dark and empty house. The windows shook with the storm outside, and they showed with darkness. And in here, there was family. There were friends. There was light and warmth and hot spaghetti, and people helping each other. She saw how his mom helped his dad by making him eat, and now he helped her by eating. She saw people lost and looking, how they help each other, even when they don't want to, even when help isn't wanted. On the news, she could hear the end of the weatherman's report. "And it's a winter storm warning for most of the state now, folks. Record low temperatures and snowfall in the mountains. This is one for the books. Stay inside with your families. It's where you belong in a storm like this. Back to you, Rebecca." Warm tears welled up in her eyes. She blinked them back. It was time to be strong. She jumped to her feet. "Thanks for dinner," she said. "I need to go home." Chapter 12. Miles to Go. 7. All the world was wind. Snow and cold were all around. Darkness was coming. My shivering was so violent now that it hurt. I stumbled forward, my feet numb. The wind blew right through my clothes, even though I was wearing them all now. My coat over my jacket, over my sweater, over my shirt. It still wasn't enough. The wind was a monster with icy claws that sunk deep into me and wouldn't let go. Bo floundered in the snow. His paws broke through in places, and he had to jump and bound to keep moving. The world was getting smaller and louder. It had frozen down to a shadowy circle of snow. Sometimes there'd be a gust of wind and the clouds around me would lift, and for a moment I could see out to the snow ridges and cloud banks farther away, but mostly I could only see the ground in front of me, my own feet, and the dog who stayed by my side through the storm. Yeah, I kept going. I don't know why. I wanted to reach the top of the mountain. I hadn't seen it yet. I was so weak, just lifting my feet to go the next step was almost more than I could do, but I kept going. There was no trail in front of me. I was lost completely, but it didn't bother me that much. Trails are for people who are coming back down. The only place I needed to go was up. "I'm not giving up," I shouted into the wind, but my words came out as a wheeze, a cough. They were weak and breathless, and the wind snatched them away before the world could hear them. It was only me, and I was freezing to death. I lurched forward, all strength gone from my muscles. I tried to take another step and found that I couldn't. I struggled to move my leg forward, but it wouldn't budge. I thought I was stuck. Then I heard Bo whining, and he wasn't beside me. He was behind me. I looked down and saw him, dug in my footprints, his teeth clenched around my pant leg. "Let me go," I said, and was scared at how blurry my words sounded. I tried again to move my leg, but he gripped harder. I stumbled and fell down to one knee. "What's the matter, Bo?" I gasped. He whined again and then let go of my pant leg long enough for one high bark. I knew that bark. It was the one he used when someone he didn't know was coming to the door. The one he used in the dark of night when he heard a sound that he didn't like. It was his warning bark. He barked his warning bark and then grabbed back onto my pants. I knelt in the snow and tried to breathe and think, but I couldn't do a good job of either. I turned to peer through the blowing snow ahead, and that's when I saw the crevasse. A crevasse is the biggest danger that lurks for mountain climbers. It is basically a giant crack in the snow and ice, a long, skinny, jagged canyon that cuts across the mountain. They can be incredibly deep. A crevasse could be only 3 or 4 feet across the top, but hundreds of deadly feet deep. Sometimes their tops get covered by snow like the mountains laid a trap. If a climber falls in one, it's almost always the end of their story. You plunge down in the darkness, down until the space gets narrower and narrower, and you're finally stuck, pinched between 2 ice walls, far from any rescue. You die of cold or hunger or suffocation, trapped in a dark coffin made of ice. They're a climber's greatest fear. Mount Rainier is covered with them. There was a crevasse stretching right in front of me. It was 5 or 6 feet, a 5 or 6 feet gap across the top. I couldn't see the bottom. I was only 10 feet from tumbling down into it, my heart already racing, hammered in my chest. Between the snow and the near darkness and my own sick stumbling, I hadn't seen it. I would have walked right into it if Bo hadn't stopped me. I sat in the snow and gasped heavy breaths and felt my heart pounding and peered down into what death looked like. It was black and cold and close. I couldn't see the bottom. I reached back and patted Bo with a cold, clumsy hand. "Good dog," I puffed, and he let go of my pants. I leaned down and hugged him and pulled his shivering body tight against mine. "Good dog, buddy." He licked my chin. His tongue was cold and dry. I fumbled with my coat and my jacket and opened them up and let the icy air inside so I could pull my camera out. My fingers were dead and distant from the cold, but I managed to hold the camera up, out over the yawning mouth of the crevasse. It was death waiting. It was what I was running from and what I was walking toward. My throat was a hard, cold lump. I pressed the camera button and snapped a picture of death. My sweater rode up, and the wind bit it like a hungry white wolf into my exposed stomach. I let the camera drop back to my chest and pulled my sweater down and zipped my coat back up. Even though I'd been kneeling there for only a few minutes, I was still out of breath. My lungs couldn't find enough air up there to hold on to. I wiggled out of my backpack and dropped it to the snow in front of me. I couldn't feel my fingers inside my gloves, and I tried and could not pinch the zipper to pull it open. Finally, I bit it in my teeth and tugged at the backpack with my hands until it pulled stiffly open. There wasn't much left inside besides my notebook, a couple of bananas, almost frozen, a Snickers bar, a water bottle nearly full with a skin of ice on the top, a plastic baggie of dog treats. I tore the baggie open with my teeth and spilled the treats out onto the snow. Bo snapped them up and crunched them loudly in his mouth. I bit off I bit at the peel of the first banana and managed to get it off, and I scarfed down the banana in a few hungry bites. My stomach was sick and wasted, but it desperately wanted fuel, and the banana stayed down. I did the same with the second banana. I chewed right through the wrapper of the Snickers and dug into the candy bar with my teeth. It was mostly frozen, but still sweet and salty and delicious. I spit out the pieces of the wrapper when I could. My dry mouth almost stuck, closed with the chocolate and caramel, but I didn't stop until the bar was gone. I almost smiled, it tasted so good. I shook the water bottle to break up the ice on the top and gulped it down. It burned my throat. I poured the rest of a shaky stream for Bo, and he lapped it up as well. I hoped he got enough. I looked up past the crevasse that Bo had saved me from. The storm swirled and seethed. The sun, wherever it was almost gone now. Night was sneaking in through the wind and the snow. When I stood up, though my legs had a new strength. I didn't know if it had come from the rest or the food, but I was ready. "Here we go, Bo," I panted, pulling the backpack back on. It weighed almost nothing. All it had left was a notebook, a pencil, and some rope. I had almost nothing left. I turned and walked to the side, along the gaping crevasse. It was black and the wind howled across its top. It looked hungry. It zigzagged diagonally up the slope, getting wider and skinnier as I went. I kept one eye on it at all time. Bo walked on the other side of me, away from the crevasse. He kept one eye on it, too. The world got darker and darker as we walked, like the blackness was leaking out of the crevasse and up through the swirling snow to fill the sky. Step by step, the dull light of the fading sun was replaced with a pale silver of moonlight. I fought my deep shivers and kept walking. Finally, I came to a place where the crevasse narrowed down to a thin gap, only about 2 feet across. One big stretching step or jump. I looked farther up the slope and saw that the gap widened out again ahead. I was on the wrong side of it, and I didn't know how long I'd have to go to find the end. Miles, maybe. And I knew my time was running out. "This is it," I gasped, bending down to lean on my knees. "We gotta cross here." Bo whined and shifted from foot to foot. He panted and licked his lips and tap danced in the snow. "I'm sorry, buddy. I don't want to either, but we got to. That's the truth." I slid my backpack off and threw it across the gap. I didn't look far. The crevasse was narrow, but it was still deep. I leaned out and looked down and saw only the blue crevasse walls disappearing down together into blackness. I tried to swallow, but my spit was either all dried up or frozen. I inched 1 foot forward, so my toes stuck out over the edge. I heard Bo grumbling behind me in a growl that turned into a whine. I didn't look back at him. My legs shook. Without thinking, I pushed off with my lead foot, and all the strength of my muscles had left and stretched forward with my other leg. The open black mouth of ice passed under me, and I landed on the other side. My feet slipped on the snow-covered ice, but I made it across, and I lay for a moment in grateful, exhausted pile. "All right, come on, Bo," I hollered across the crevasse. I turned around and got up on my knees. "Come on, buddy, you can do it. It's not that far." Bo kept tap dancing. He yipped and whined and ran back and forth in the snow. His whole body was shaking. "This is nothing, buddy. Don't look down. Just jump to me, Bo. Come on, Bo. Come on." Bo tiptoed to the waiting edge. He yipped again, his ears back and his tail down. His front paws snuck up to the very rim. He gathered his hind legs underneath him and lowered his rump, ready to jump. He looked up at me with his trusting, mismatched eyes. Here's what I don't get. Why that dog would trust me and follow me anywhere after I dragged him up the mountain in that storm. That's the truth. Bo sprang. One of his front paws slipped on the ice. He only got half a sideways jump. His front paws made it across, but his back paws fell short. He clawed at the ice for a second with his front claws, but there was nothing to hold on to. Bo disappeared over the edge into the crevasse.